Have you plagiarized? Defining, avoiding, and understanding the ramifications of plagiarism. Most students understand, in a basic way, what plagiarism is. They know it's an academic conduct violation, for one thing, and when asked, can define it acceptably. A typical dictionary definition for plagiarism is the practice of taking someone else's work or ideas and passing them off as one's own. The GSU Code of Student Conduct has offered a similar definition. Plagiarism is the offering of the words, ideas, computer data programs, or graphics of others as one's own in any academic exercise. As you can see here, the general phrase from the previous slide, someone else's work or ideas, has become a more specific list of the types of material that may not be used without permission or acknowledgement. Let's start with one obvious violation spelled out in the Code of Student Conduct. The use of materials prepared by another person or agency engaged in the selling of term papers or other academic materials is forbidden. This means you can't use your friend's paper from last semester, hire someone else to write your paper for you, or use a paper available for purchase online. The Code also has forbidden the offering of another's work, whether verbatim or paraphrased, as original material without identifying the source in an academic paper. In other words, you can't use study results, diagrams, or papers, complete or partial, others have produced and pass them off as your own work. Most students recognize these acts as intentional cheating and as clear and obvious examples of plagiarism. However, what about the situations that are not so clear-cut? For example, the definitions of plagiarism we've already discussed say nothing about intent to cheat. Many students do not imagine that they could be held responsible for unintentional plagiarism, yet this happens all the time. For example, the GSU Code of Student Conduct has expressly forbidden self-plagiarism, defined as resubmitting work previously submitted without appropriate or accurate citation or credit, and or without explicit approval from the instructor. In other words, unless you obtain explicit permission from your instructor in advance, you can't recycle all or parts of a paper you submitted for a previous course, even if you wrote it entirely yourself. This comes as a surprise to many students. As a graduate student, you may not be tempted to resubmit an old paper you wrote as an undergraduate. On the other hand, you will wish to insert sections of pre-written text into your dissertation. For example, you may have developed your methodology section during one dissertation course, and you will want to carry this forward to use in your actual dissertation. Using pre-written sections describing ongoing work is expected under these circumstances. The key is transparency. In this case, your professors and advisors know where the pre-written work comes from, so this process would not be an example of plagiarism. Other mistakes students often make fall into the category the Council of Writing Program Administrators, or WPA, has called the misuse of sources, which includes, but is not limited to, such errors as misidentifying sources, listing sources in the bibliography or references section, but not identifying in the body of the paper what comes from these sources, quoting sources without quotation marks, and patch writing, the use of insufficiently paraphrased material from a source. Many students don't realize that inserting material from a source, while changing only a few words here and there, even while citing the source, is often considered to be a form of plagiarism. For example, compare these two passages. Most students, reading their writing aloud, will correct in essence all errors of spelling, grammar, and by intonation, punctuation, but usually without noticing that what they read departs from what they wrote. Hartwell, 1985, found that when reading their writing aloud, most students will correct errors of spelling, grammar, and punctuation, but usually without noticing that what they are reading is different from what they wrote. The second passage is a patch-written version of the author's original wording. It's not identical, but it's close enough so that a student who submitted such a passage as part of a paper could be considered guilty of plagiarism. To paraphrase a source accurately without plagiarizing, you must completely change both the wording and the sentence structure of the original passage. Changing a few words here and there is not enough. Compare these two passages. Digital technology is still in its relative infancy. We know it can be an incredibly useful educational tool, but we need much more research before we can draw firm conclusions about its positive and negative features. In the case of reading, our first task is to make ourselves aware of the effect technology potentially has on how we wrap our minds around the written word when encountered in print versus on screen. Barron, 2017, concluded a study on the effects of printed versus digital texts on readers by suggesting that further work needs to be done in order to weigh the obvious educational advantages of digital media against any potentially negative impact they may have on readers' ability to process and respond to text. In this instance, the second passage is an accurate and completely rewritten paraphrase of the first and would be perfectly acceptable in an academic paper. Patch writing and other examples of the misuse of sources, which students may commit without intending to cheat, are nonetheless often considered to be plagiarism and are treated as violations of the Code of Student Conduct. You are responsible for reading, understanding, and abiding by the code. As they say, ignorance of the law is no excuse. Georgia Southern University in general, and the graduate program in particular, takes plagiarism violations very seriously. In fact, according to the Handbook for Program Directors and Graduate Advisors, failure to comply with the academic dishonesty section of the Student Conduct Code can result in dismissal from your program. Don't let this happen to you. Fortunately, we have provided resources to help as you navigate the process of ethically incorporating source material into your work. For a more complete definition and discussion of patch writing, as well as tips on how to avoid plagiarism in your academic work, please see our video, A Grad Student's Guide to Avoiding Plagiarism. Good luck!